Okay, good evening everyone. I'm here with the team behind the hybrid documentary Grit Oyster. This is Rebecca Lloyd-Evans and Alex Fry. Rebecca conceived the idea and directed it, and Alex started out as the editor and then became Rebecca's co-director as the project developed, which is something that we can talk about. We always have our conversations in evening, assuming that people have seen the film so that we can talk about them without worrying about spoilers. Grit Oyster isn't really a spoilersy film, but nevertheless, it's nice to have a sort of open conversation. So you just assume that everybody's seen it. But for everybody's benefit, to recap, Grit Oyster is about women, real life women, talking about their kind of sexual fantasies and how they sort of interact with their own life and their perspectives on sort of gender and the way they live their lives. And it's quite broad ranging, safe to say. And as I say, it's a hybrid documentary, so it blends real women's voices in anonymous interviews with staged footage to illustrate what we're seeing. And then through it, there is a theme of this goddess, Astarte, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Astarte. So I'm not, but good effort.
Yeah.
And she's sort of going through it, and we're almost looking through her eyes, is the way I read it, on life now versus how it might have been for women if she ran the world, I guess. So let's dive in. If at any point anybody wants to ask a question, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and also a chat box. Use either and I will jump in with the question for you. But just to kick us off, Rebecca, why don't you tell us how the project kind of came to be?
I suppose it's been something that's been gestating for a while. It started because I wrote a script for a radio play, and at the heart of that script there were these, someone was reading pornography to old blind people, and I thought it was going to be the most fun part of the script was going to be writing that pornography or writing the erotica, and I thought that I would write my own fantasies. And then in the process of trying to do that, I basically was completely paralyzed because I felt that I would be judged or ashamed, or I suppose there's like some tension between the person that you think that you are outwardly and then this person that is in your inner life. And I felt that like definitely like this kind of conflict between this idea of yourself as a feminist and then this hidden world. And so I ended up not using my own fantasies, and I started interviewing other people about theirs. And there was just like this extraordinary, like, it's just a place where there's this depth of the imagination, I suppose, of female imagination, but also that they said so much about the inner workings of our mind and the other things that are going on in our life. And I suppose, you know, that was the beginning of starting interviewing people about their fantasies. And then,
how did you come to decide to make it a hybrid documentary? Because it's such a strong choice. I mean, there's the obvious anonymity angle, which I guess helps you on a kind of logistical level, but it also offers you a lot. So how did you come to that decision?
You know, there's always going to be people that would be willing to put their face to camera and their story, but that just felt like that would be going against the very notion of fantasies as this kind of hidden private space. And I wanted to keep that, you know, that gave us more room to be able to also play with how we might visually try to represent them, because they are just this thing that goes on in your head. And
creating a kind of a hurdle for us, I guess, as filmmakers, you know, it's sort of actively having to think about how you realize a scene based on someone's testimony. Kind of, it creates a kind of extra layer of thought that you have to go through. And so through that we kind of came up with some sort of interesting ideas about how we might depict these in a kind of less sort of literal way.
Did you ever think about anonymizing their voices and having people perform what they told you?
Lip syncing them. Yeah, we thought about that, but first of all, for lip syncing to be done, and there are filmmakers that have done it just so incredibly, and like, of course, we were inspired by, I want to say, now I can't think of what the film is on the top of my head. Yeah, exactly. You know, and that was just done so fantastically. but it has got to be completely perfect in order to do lip syncing. But the other thing about it is there's a magic in the voices, and I think like the voices themselves carry so much, and if we tried to like anonymize that or bring in actors, we'd lose so much of the strength of them being like real women and their stories. And
the delivery, the accents, the way that they, you know, kind of deliver the information. It was kind of, as soon as we had the interviews, we were kind of blown away really by the kind of depth and range of what people talk about.
And how did you find these women?
We both come from documentary backgrounds, so like actually almost everyone came from connections of like people that we had through various documentaries. I guess I don't want to say too much because
of course they're anonymous.
Give away a little bit about who they are, but everything pretty much came from a network of people that we've worked with on documentaries, and I suppose that trusted us to like keep their anonymity or trusted the process, I suppose. So we wanted there to be like a diverse range of voices. You know, when you're only dealing with a short film and you end up we interviewed more than 3 people. But in the end, you know, what can you fit into 15 minutes? So.
Yeah, we did put out an open call, but in the end, the people that came through were people who kind of had some
relationship
to us and trusted us and trusted the kind of position that we'd come from. So that was kind of gave us these.
What about the Astarte idea?
Yeah, the Astarte idea, I think, came out of conversations that we were having through the whole project about, you know, an idea of how different it could be, like how different women's connection to their sexuality could be. And then we began to discover that there was this like utopic world that we're talking about, like a kind of post-patriarchal world that turned out was kind of this prehistorical world. And of course it's just like extrapolation from anthropological and archaeological like evidence, like statues, and but there is this idea that in prehistory that people worshipped female goddesses, and we know that through the statue evidence and things, and that particularly there was always this goddess of sex and love, and there's ideas that in order to communicate with them there would be like sacred sex rituals and things that would be like the human way of communicating with the goddess. And we were trying to, I mean, Astarte, the myth of Astarte is that she landed from a star and she landed into Byblos, which is in Lebanon. And we tried to kind of recreate that idea by having this character fall from the sky and land in the middle of Hackney. I've got reservations as to, you know, whether or not the real women's stories completely sync with the Astarte idea. I think that I really like conceptually like the idea of what Astarte represents, but when you try and put it into filmic terms, like it starts to you know, it starts to not be something in your head, but something that's very much kind of got an idea that I you know, do they work together is like a question that we're still asking ourselves. Because we read so much about it and studied so much about it that for us it's really kind of clear what she represents, and for some people they seem to pick up on it and some people less so, you know, but therein lies the beauty of making a short film where you can kind of do a bit of an experiment. You know, the joy of some
with a lot of freedom.
The joy of Uncertain Kingdom in some ways was, you know, not being a television commission with a commissioning editor to say no, you can't do that, and we were able to experiment with these ideas.
Can you talk us through a little bit about her costume? She has a very strong look. I know how much she thought about it. Nothing there's going to be coincidental. Is there a meaning behind what she's wearing? Is it, or what she's doing? What could you?
There are certain props which, I mean, most of the props have quite specific kind of meanings. You know, the horns were very much kind of representations from, you know, kind of all these statues that we saw. And we also got particularly fascinated. It's hard to spot, but she's carrying a bone, which is a counting stick, and it's a kind of a bone with notches on it. And these were identified as some of the earliest counting devices, and they were ways for women to measure their cycles. Yeah. So there's some idea that counting itself came out of some of these devices. So that was a particular one that we found fascinating. But there were others as well. I can't remember exactly.
I mean, actually, the costume was really difficult because when you're trying to kind of put into human form something which is very much ephemeral or like drawn from like statue evidence, as soon as you do that, then, you know, it's a
composite of many different sources, I guess.
But do you start kind of creating something that looks a bit kind of new agey, or that has these kind of connotations like that are somehow theatrical? In the end, you know, Erica, who was just wonderful, who played Astarte, and we should say that everyone was like non-actors, like everyone involved, although Olivia Norris, some people are performers in some ways or artists in their own right, but Erica, she is an artist, as she's an animator, but not an actress. And she brought so much to her costume as well. Like she brought the nudity to it, and you know, I think that had its own power.
Yeah, that's an incredibly brave debut. I didn't know that. I love that.
Yeah, and she actually devised some of the costume herself, didn't she? Kind of, she just really kind of relished the role and kind of, I think it was,
embodied it.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been the
That's
same.
great to know, because it makes her almost like a contributor to the fantasy thing or tapestry itself in a way. Not to say that those are necessarily her sexual fantasies, but it's stuff coming from her and her kind of.
Yeah, we tried to allow that in the process, that all the performers kind of brought things to the film, and you know, had long discussions about how they would depict things, and really tried to let them kind of bring their own, you know, because they're all artists in their own right, bring their own kind of aesthetics. And
I think when I began the project, and this was something that we spoke about a lot, like I was thinking, oh, okay, well, this is all going to be about like depicting female sexuality through a female gaze. And I think at the beginning I thought that was going to be about conversations with cinematographers, and I thought it would be like camera angles. How do you portray a female body? And then as the project went on, I thought we began to realize that the female gaze, I suppose for me, is more about the process of working rather than a particular shot or an image. Way of working being, like, for example, the nudity. Everyone chose themselves what they were comfortable with in terms of nudity, and that could change on the day, and that could change on the shot in the moment. And there's one scene that involves an orgasm, someone orgasming just on their face, and obviously we had long conversations with her beforehand as if this was something that she wanted to do or not. But then even on the day itself, we set up a camera and we all left the place that we were filming, so that, you know, it was completely up to her what she did in that moment in front of that camera, and it was very clear that it didn't, she could perform something, she could do something really, or she could not do it at all, and that would be totally fine. The film would find some way of accommodating for that. Equally with Olivia, when it came to her kind of dance scene in the bedroom, that was for her in that moment to decide, and the same with Liberty. And I think it's these kinds of things, like also we always as a team had meetings throughout the day, particularly sharing breakfast together, and having breakfast and talking about not just the day's work ahead, but also what people have got going on in their lives. You know, if people have got children, then did their children sleep all right last night? Are they feeling okay? Are they? And I think that in a way that whole kind of more holistic way of working began to feel to me a bit more like thinking about, you know, how to work with a female gaze. I realize we're not having this as a conversation with other people. They may disagree, and I think it's a conversation that needs, you know, debate.
Yeah, and I think that we both share this idea in general about a way of working which is less hierarchical, kind of trying to kind of involve everyone in what we're doing. And I feel like we created a really nice atmosphere on set, and it was an experience that we all really relished. You know, the process was as important as the end.
Which kind of also speaks to how this collaboration also ended up really happening was, well, I mean, strengthening, because Alex was always involved in the project as the editor. And then, and because we were doing the interviews first, I was doing the interviews first and we were doing an audio edit. Alex was doing an audio edit. In a way, the edit was forming the the edit happened almost first rather than last. So we were kind of creatively working together right from the beginning. And then, as you know, I fell pregnant, or I had really horrendous morning sickness over that, just in the period that we were like going into more serious production. And luckily, we'd already been collaborating, and Alex was able to be there to kind of step up more, and, you know, become more part of the process. And I think that was, you know, perhaps, you know, again, it's a conversation, but I saw that as kind of quite interesting in doing this project, which was talking a lot about the female gaze, which was, you know, being able to have the support to keep working and keep kind of, yeah, and everyone on set was really supportive of me, and we tried to do the same for other people as well.
What did it feel like to you to start out on, you know, the beginning of the journey, and you picture yourself, you know, on some level, you know, you obviously picture yourself on set, you picture yourself carrying it through, and then come into this situation where actually you have to take more of a back seat just because physically it's just not a good idea. What's that like, handing over? Obviously, you know, you guys are close.
I wouldn't say Bex took a back seat. It was more that she couldn't really carry anything, which is
sorry.
So she was just issuing orders from the sidelines.
Okay.
But no, I mean, she was, yeah, always kind of completely. It became like totally kind of two-hander, and in a way it was very seamless. We just kind of continued as we had been, but you know, you were obviously going through lots of morning sickness, and
I mean,
you know, it's hard to keep going, but it didn't involve any, you know, kind of major adjustments, because we're such good friends anyway. We kind of we have a very kind of sort of good sort of rapport creatively, so it wasn't too difficult from my perspective. I don't know how you felt.
No, I mean, I was just so grateful that we were able to kind of keep going, and, you know, that we were able to find a way that we, yeah, and we've worked together quite a lot before, so we have got some kind of working relationship as well. So it was, yeah, I think so much as well is about, you know, how do you collaborate? This project was so collaborate, and if you're working on these kinds of budgets as well, where, you know, people, it's about everyone having an opportunity to do something that they want to experiment with, and I hope that people involved would be saying the same, that it was a little experiment for them as well.
Absolutely. On the topic of experiment, could you give us a bit of an insight into the soundscape, which is so unusual, and I think probably on first viewing some audience members actually might not notice it because you sort of feel it rather than, you know, could really pinpoint it, but actually such interesting things are going on, like the sounds of fire at one point over Astarte's view of a church. It sounds like the whole thing's kind of being pulled down. Just one thing I noticed. Could you talk through some of the ideas that are there and some of the stuff that we might have missed and what you intended?
I'm happy that you noticed that one, because yeah, that is very much about, I don't know if you noticed in the shot, but it's like got a lion with his feet on a woman's head. I mean, it's just weird, these kind of subliminal,
this
like,
iconography that's
yeah.
all around us that we just don't really even notice. But,
I mean, I have to say, like, talking about Alex's collaboration, he's just really brilliant with audio as an editor in general. And so, you know, we started this as an audio edit. In fact, we had a 25-minute audio edit that we were like, okay, this is a finished piece of work. And getting it down to 15 minutes and creating the visuals was like, oh, are we taking away from what we had with the audio? But you speak about the audio.
I mean, the kind of piece took shape as an audio piece first, and so it felt very complete at one point, which was a bit intimidating because we hadn't shot a frame, and then we suddenly had to kind of go out and realize all this stuff, and the fear is that you're actually taking away from what's already there. But you know, I mean, audio and image work in very different ways, but I guess as the piece developed with the visuals, particularly like with Astarte, we were kind of really unsure how to integrate her into what was going on in the film, and kind of worried that, you know, is this too new agey? How are we going to kind of give it a sort of potency? And we ended up watching Mirror by Tarkovsky. And there are these kind of scenes where I think the ceiling's falling down in a particular scene, and the sound design is so extraordinary in that. And I actually downloaded the sound and put it to the image of Astarte, and suddenly it kind of came to life. So then I started again from scratch and just started building up these layers and layers of different sound to kind of create this sort of cacophony of feeling, I guess. And
to make her not too kind of hippie as well, you know, she's fierce, and the soundscape had to be that, like, kind of do that work, where perhaps the images didn't always.
We wanted to have a kind of fierceness to it, and I guess the fire is kind of you know, it's really underpinning that idea that with the kind of onset of kind of monolithic religions, Judaism, Christianity, that an entire kind of way of thinking died, and a kind of and a policing of sexuality kind of took on a whole different kind of level, really.
Because it kind of started around 10,000 years ago, was when, like, our worshipping of goddesses began to come to an end, because agriculture came in, and then with agriculture it became land ownership that was passed from father to son, and with that became marriage, and women became more, you know, owned by the men in turn, connected to it. So and with that then monolithic religions as well. So I mean, look, all of these ideas, I'm not sure whether or not they're kind of captured within this film, but they're the things that we were thinking about when it came to.
That's what inspired us.
That was like the thinking behind Astarte. And you know, sometimes it feels like it's two films, and sometimes we think no, they're better together, and you know, that's for other people to kind of, I guess, decide.
Well, I mean, as a semi-outsider, obviously I was one of the people who commissioned it, but as a semi-outsider to the process, and somebody, I would assume one of the relatively few people to have heard the audio edit, several of them actually, and then see the final film, I think for me, the distinction, I would agree that the audio edits were incredibly powerful. I mean, one of them I found actually a really difficult listen because of something we can talk about in a minute. But, you know, because it was just audio and the women were so in your head, and there was more of them, and it was such a kind of montage of people speaking, your experience of it was very much that you were just sort of within a conversation had by these women, and you both were quite sort of, and obviously you were constructing it, but you were sort of erased by that. Whereas I think that you guys bringing the images meant that we could feel your voices as filmmakers and your perspective, which I think was exciting for us, because, you know, that's not only did we commission a visual piece, but we also commissioned you specifically, and, you know, because we wanted to hear what you had to say, and it mattered to us that your perspective came through. So I think that for me is the difference between the two projects, and I think they do both absolutely have stuff going for them.
That's good to know.
But yeah, the thing that that longer audio edit, what was striking to me was that a lot of what the women were sharing, and this is so not my area, there's probably a lot of research papers on this, but there was such an interweaving of trauma with sexual fantasy and actually into the kind of the difference between public life and private life, and how all of this was kind of weaving together for these women. And I was so struck by that, and what some of the stuff that these women were sharing, which I won't share now because it's not in the cut, and it could be for any number of reasons that it's not in the cut, but there's big hard stuff there to deal with. And I was so struck by that because obviously, for starters, you've made a space where these women feel comfortable to talk about that, which I'd love you to talk about how you achieve that. And also I'd love to know what your takeaway was from that. Were you surprised by how the relationship between those two things? What were the revelations for you having these conversations with these women?
Ooh, many questions.
Yeah, sorry, I just buried a load.
One thing is that I think it's perhaps surprising, but it does seem that fantasy world can actually be quite a healing space. So, for example, quite often, and we don't need to go into this in great detail, but there may be stories of rape that had both either influenced from the women's past or become part of their fantasy. Now, the thing about it becoming part of your fantasy is you're actually the one in control. So it's happening in your mind and you actually can control it. Whereas perhaps what's happening, may have happened in the past, is something that was beyond your control. So there's quite a lot of ideas around fantasies being this kind of place for healing. I suppose, was I surprised that so many people had stories of sexual violence in their past? Sadly not. And I think, that's what the Me Too movement really, highlighted to all of us, is it's kind of almost, it's endemic, exactly. And, with the conception of this project, I suppose, it's really important, obviously, everything that stemmed from the Me Too movement and within the film industry particularly, but quite often their narratives end up being with women as the victim. And I suppose that within the fantasy world, the women are able to reclaim their sense of empowerment or strength. And so this was, in some ways, you can't ignore sexual violence as part of everyone's history to some degree. But then, is there a way that can be turned around and become part of their strength? And definitely, Audre Lorde speaks about it really well, but the strength of the female erotic power, and that if we harness that, we can use it in so many other areas of our life, as mothers, as creators, as it's so much beyond the bedroom, for want of another word. And again, using Astarte was also trying to kind of conjure up that idea of an erotic power, which may be ritualistic, or in this case we used it ritualistically. But yeah, sadly, I wasn't surprised. We decided not to include as much as we recorded, obviously, because it felt wrong as a balance in the project, but we still included some, and it's really very shocking to hear. But if we included too much, then I think you lose the ability to be able to kind of get lost in a fantasy at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my surprise wasn't so much the statistical reality of it. I think it was more, I was surprised that so many of the women who would speak to you were also the women that had been through it. I think in my probably quite naive expectation was it would be all the women with kind of sunny, cloudless sexual experiences would be I would love to sit down and chat to you about all the, who
has that really?
But I mean, I think that's exactly it. And I think that's why it was eye-opening for me, because it is so much more complex, so much more complex than that.
And I think, in terms of people talking, well, that's documentary, isn't it? Where there were people opening up to you. And in this was my area. It would have felt wrong, I think, for Alex to be in the interviews. But I often give quite a lot of myself in an interview, and I think when documentary works, and of course there's loads of times where it doesn't, and we're constantly needing to question the ethics of how we make films, but when it works, it's a cathartic experience for the person as well, or an empowering experience as well. So you've got to hope that you're creating a space for that to be the case. And everyone that gave their testimony obviously has seen the film, and there's given us their full support and have like loved it. I don't know if that's the right
and got
word.
involved because they felt it was important to share these experiences and these things to be illuminated.
That segues quite nicely into what is going to be my last question. Unless anybody wants to dive in with a question, please do. We talked there about what they got out of it and what they had this feeling of having done something important. What did you both take away from the film? Whether that's a professional lesson and I'd never do that again, or whether it's something more personal. I'm just curious. We focus so much on what audiences get out of films, and
I just love the process from kind of sitting down and talking with Rebecca to actually finding ourselves on set with a load of people, and kind of just that it was really a joyful experience, and everyone involved just so enthusiastic, and it, even if we'd not come out with something which we weren't proud of, which we are proud of the film, but the process itself was just so, for me anyway, kind of joyful. And I loved doing it. It was great.
The thing that I got most out of it was the kind of spirit of the set, I suppose. The like this kind of little family that we made for the few days that we were filming, and that I thought, okay, this is so much, it's about this process, it's about this, and I think
create a space for something to happen.
And I'm still questioning whether or not all of the concepts totally come together, and if I learned something from that would be, although it was glorious to work without commissioning editors, there is also the thing which we just went off into our own little bubble, and then you don't necessarily, like, I don't think I really wanted anyone else's opinion, because I felt so protective and private about it. The fact that we would, and perhaps that's something which there was a lesson maybe in there as well, that actually collaborating with other people on that kind of more bigger that can have more of a kind of bigger picture to your project is also a positive thing.
When to listen and when to protect what you're doing. It's a really difficult line, that, and it's always something that I've wrestled with. Kind of when do you listen to other voices? And I think on this, I stand by what we did. I think it was. I think it was a really great experiment, and I'm really glad that we made something bold. Kind of, and I hope it's the beginning of more partnership.
Well, thank you both very much for coming on tonight. This was a lovely conversation, and I learned loads about it. So that was great. We'll put this up on YouTube for anybody who wants to share it with anyone else. It'll be there now forever. And I am back tomorrow night with the final one of these with the team behind the documentary Left Coast. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Can we also add a massive thank you to our amazing producers, Kat Mansour and Kate Vogel, who were so supportive and so dedicated, and they gave absolutely everything, including their personal time and their encouragement and their love, and we completely couldn't have done it without them. And
right from the beginning of the process, they encouraged us, and you know, believed in what we were trying to do, gave up their personal time, their weekends, drove us around, stood in the rain, told us like to, you know, keep going when we didn't want to, and like move the shoot days forward when we were facing torrential rain. And, you know, I mean, just like gave 110%. Those, yeah, we're so grateful.
Yeah, thanks, Kate and Kat. You're the best.